Thank you. Welcome everyone to ACDE number 209. So a couple things on the agenda today. First, any updates on Pectra, and specifically there's a minor change around the 7702 receipts that we need to discuss. Then we'll spend a big chunk of the call, I imagine, talking about Fusaka. Our deadline to finalize the scope was today, and then potentially extending into next week's CL call, as we discussed last week. And then finally, at the end, had this proposal around reconfiguring all core devs, so we can discuss that. And yeah, I guess before we go into the 7702 receipts proposal, any DevNet or implementation updates on Pectra that people wanted to share?
There's a PR open for the ETH69 Dev P2P protocol that it would be really good for teams to review quickly so that we can get that finalized.
And this is about the drop-in history?
It's related, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, do you want to post the PR in the chat, please? Ben?
ETH69 doesn't actually need to happen on a hard fork, does it?
Well, it'd be pretty nice if we had it.
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, it can happen anytime, I assume.
Well, it's more like if we get it in now, it's pretty sure that like most people are going to have it after, so it makes it a lot more available.
Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't, it's not, it doesn't alter the timeline of Fusaka. It's not like a risk on that.
And I guess, yeah, on the timelines point, so the expectation is that by the end of next week, early the week after, we have the client releases, and then the announcement for the fork should go out on the 22nd or 23rd. Is that still reasonable? No major concerns or issues around that? Okay. Then yes, there was this point raised around the transaction receipts for 7702. I'll post the PR in the chat here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Lucas, do you want to give some context on this?
Actually, this was written by my colleague Nicholas, but it's a pretty small change. For context, we just want to add the results of the authorization into the transaction receipt. So for context, right now, to identify whether the authorization has passed, we have to do if get code to check. So we thought it would be a better developer experience if we can add this success or failure in the authorization, success or failure of this authorization in the transaction receipt.
Sorry to just speak up, but I think it's not possible this way, because then we would have to actually store this, right?
What do you mean by store this?
I mean, the thing is that the success or failure of the authorization, I guess, depends on a couple things. So this field would have to be stored by the clients into their respective databases in order to be available within the receipt. And I'm not sure if it's possible right now to make such a change. Like, we're pretty late in. At this point, we're just waiting for, you know, like the date to arrive of the fork, so we can no longer make these types of changes where we just, you know, like adapt some fundamental, like this is not a change that is just an RPC API change. I feel like this requires some actual changes in the client to make it work. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like it might be too late for this one.
Right, and like Klein says in the chat, it depends on the current nodes.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like the validity of the authorization depends on the nonce. It depends on the signature validity, and I guess it's kind of it. I guess there's another check in there somehow. Like it cannot be. I guess you can override a delegation, but I vaguely remember there was one other one. So the main thing is that these are conditions. I mean, the signature validity is never going to change. So we can determine that statically from the transaction. We could, at the time of serving the receipt on the RPC, we could actually basically parse the signature again and validate it. And if it's wrong, then, well, we're not going to have, it's not going to be, passed. But the other thing with the nonce, then we would have to check, in what was the state at the time of the transaction inclusion, and this would require like an archive node to actually know. So the only other thing in order to really correctly serve this for all time is we would have to store the success into the receipt itself, into the client database. And like I said, we can no longer make this type of change now so late in the pipeline.
So I guess, and so in practice now, what you have to do is to call get code and then parse the response. I guess, I'd be curious, when in the doc it says, you need to parse the response, but is it just checking that there's now code in this EOA, or you're matching that against some like expected delegation template there?
Okay, I guess because we're not core dev, so we did not fully recognize the implementation details. So yeah, we thought it would be a minor change to improve like the developer experience. But if the risk is too high, I guess this should not be considered.
And I guess I'm trying to understand how bad is it on the developer experience perspective. Like it's it's like you're doing one extra RPC call and then matching the data against this.
Sorry, let me jump in here. So I was the original author of this proposal. So I think the feedback that we got from the team is that it kind of breaks away from the current validation cycle of wallet provider, where instead of just getting the result through a transaction receipt, there are additional steps just to accommodate this Pectra workflow. Yeah, this is the original reason why we proposed this change to the API. And like Lucas said, we initially thought, we're not core devs, so we initially thought this would be a small change just to improve the quality of life. But if this is as big of a change as Felix has mentioned, maybe we can reconsider the workflow on our end and maybe just work around going through two RPC calls.
And I guess one comment in the chat as well is that we probably don't need a hard fork to add this if we wanted to in the future. So I would lean towards not adding this for now because we are pretty close to shipping the fork. But then if it is like a major pain point, this is something we can add to clients after the fork. And I assume this is also something, this would not be ideal, but this is also something that like some clients can support and not all. Felix?
So I have two opinions. First of all, this shouldn't be something that some clients support and others don't. We've been fighting a lot against these types of, like customized RPC extensions. And I think from our point of view, it's not really something we should be doing anymore because it's causing us a lot of trouble actually with these incompatibilities. And then the second thing is that it would require a hard fork if it is supposed to be stored within the receipt officially, because changing receipts is always a hard fork. It changes the receipts hash as well. So it has to be coordinated.
Okay.
That's kind of the thing. I mean, the clients could, in theory, store it somehow so the way it works in most clients is that they only store for receipts, like the minimum amount of information you have to store for receipts is exactly the information which is generated by the consensus protocol. So it's just a couple fields, and then the rest of them you can kind of derive. Some clients store additional information in a database about the receipt, some stuff, so they don't have to derive it later. And this is something which is possible, but it comes at the expense of making the database larger. So it's something to know. And then you can also no longer validate the receipts that you are storing against the consensus directly, because the consensus only secures certain fields. So this is just something to know. If we want to add it to this critical set of fields, which is secured by the consensus, it's going to be a hard fork to add it.
Okay, Roman?
Could we maybe consider adding it only for the a few recent blocks, and then it would be trivial on both archival and full nodes to derive this field?
So the receipt, how would that work in practice?
I mean, we would not store it in the receipt, but we would just
Oh.
add this field on the RPC.
So you yes, kind of like the block hash, I think you can only query for like, what is it, 256 blocks or something like that. So like a similar design to that.
Yeah, but because as far as I understand, like you only care about like authorization succeeding in the moment when you are submitting notes.
So if this is what you care about, then you can, if this is the workflow, to basically just ask directly after submitting the transaction if it has worked. You can always work around it with JSON RPC by just sending a batch with two items. One would be the get receipt, and the other one is get code. And then if they, it is probably going to be okay.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, we should not change the specs now. It seems like there's workarounds. What's the best place? Is there like an ETH? Yeah, there's an ETH Magicians. I guess it's a 7702 ETH Magicians thread. But yeah, maybe we can just move the conversation there to figure out if there is a simple JSON RPC change we can make that doesn't require a hard fork that would make this flow easier. And if there isn't, then also just defining what's like the best, yeah, the best way to efficiently query this data.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anything else on Pectra that people wanted to discuss? Sweet. So yeah, I guess this means we're wrapping up Pectra. Again, yeah, please have your releases out by the end of the next week or early the week after that. And we will get this deployed. For anyone listening, the hard fork is scheduled to happen on May 7th. So plan to update your nodes before then. Okay, so next up, Fusaka. So we'd agreed that we would finalize the scope for the fork as we wrapped up Pectra, and we'd set a deadline of today. I think on the CL call last week, realized they might need an extra week to do so, and then hopefully we can get the EL side of things finalized on this call. And first, before we get into like the specific team preferences, I realized we didn't quite define, or we didn't define super explicitly what finalized would mean. Reflecting on it after last week's call, I think a good bar for this should be that we decide what's the final set of considered for inclusions EIPs, ideally today, and then everything else that was proposed, kind of by definition, gets declined for this fork. And then for anything that's CFI'd, we would only move things to be scheduled for inclusions once we're ready to implement them in DevNet. So effectively, like the deadline today would be for proposals for the fork. Then we're working from a smaller set of things based on what we can actually implement. And I think the one thing that literally every single team agreed on with regards to their prioritization is that we should ship Fusaka in 2025, that PeerDAS should be in it. So any inclusions we make beyond that should not affect this. But yeah, I guess first of all, does this seem reasonable to people? Does anyone have like an objection with the process like this at a high level, or is it unclear in any way? Okay, let's go then. So given this, yeah, all of the EL teams shared their preferences. On the last call, the last EL call, we'd already CFI'd, or sorry, we'd already SFI'd one other. Okay, sorry, my bad. On the last call, we CFI'd one other EIP for the mod XP gas repricing. Let me just post the list in the chat. So as it stands today, the only things that are scheduled are PeerDAS and then the DevNet 0 and DevNet 1 versions of EOF. The things that are CFI'd are the R1 precompile, RIP 712, the DevNet 2 EOF EIPs, and then this mod XP gas cost increase. In terms of like the things client teams kind of signaled that they would like, I don't think there was anything else that was effectively supported by teams unanimously. Let me look through the list with like the other broadly supported ones were. So I guess the other ones around addressing mod XP were also popular. So let me get the exact number. The upper bound limit on mod XP, so 7823, was kind of the other one that stood out. Yeah, as like broadly supported. And then yeah, maybe I guess as the next step, if some of the client teams want to share like in more detail what they'd like to see, included or like CFI'd beyond this, that's probably a good step. Yeah, Ben?
Since it was brought up at the start of the call, and support ETH69, but from 2 points of view, it's helpful, but also from the point of view it's not contingent on the fork timeline. So it'd be nice to get into the fork, but it would be good to mark it as a thing.
So ETH69, didn't we just say we wanted that for Pectra?
Did we?
I mean, earlier on, like, weren't we talking about this like 5 minutes ago, saying it would be nice to have?
I thought we were saying Fusaka, but yeah, okay.
So okay, so sorry, so for ETH69, so
drop pre-merge field. It's the first one in the list.
Yes. So okay, so earlier when we were saying we want to have this done, my understanding is we wanted to have it done for the Pectra releases so that everyone who updates at Pectra has this activated. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Okay, but like, yeah, I guess, do client teams generally want to try and get this, like when we say Pectra, it means in the next week? That was my understanding of the earlier conversation. Is that correct? Yeah, Andrew?
Well, so about dropping pre-merge block bodies, then so we are going to experiment with it on Sepolia, but we are not making, probably we won't be making a release in the Pectra timeframe. We'll have a release maybe a month or two later. But also about ETH69, it's nice if ETH69 specifies the available block range, and we'll implement it at some point probably. But again, for dropping pre-merge block bodies, it's not strictly necessary. we will just probably reply with new block bodies on ETH68.
Okay. Okay, so we won't have all the teams with ETH69 before Pectra, but teams are actually spending spending time on this. And yeah, because it doesn't require a hard fork, it's kind of awkward or to include it, but I think we can probably table that one for now and just accept that teams will be working on supporting this and figure out the right place to put it. But I agree, it should go live before before Fusaka. Felix?
I just want to make a quick comment, Tim. So here's the thing, right? We've had it in the past that we've included an EIP, I don't forget which one it was, that was literally just signaling the intent for us to do something.
Yeah,
so
the self-destruct.
I feel like this, if we can do that one, then we might as well include the E69.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I think, yeah, we can figure out the right way to frame it, but I think saying like, yeah, we want ETH69, if not before Pectra, shortly after. I'll find a way to put that in the specs, but I don't want to spend too much time on like the logistics of that now. Does any client team disagree that they'll be supporting ETH69 in the next few months? Okay, so we'll move forward with ETH69. And yeah, I think to the extent some teams have it before Pectra, that would be good because it means all the people updating for Pectra will now be able to use that. There is like, one interesting question in the chat around raising the gas limit, which is another thing that's been discussed. It's kind of a weird topic because there's no EIP for this, right? It's not something that the clients control, but it is something that takes work. Like Marius had a comment saying, Get has some memory issues now at 60 million, and so fixing those things is something that takes like client teams bandwidth. So is that something that we should somehow also incorporate in this? And like, I don't know if we should have just like some placeholder EIP that says try to get the gas limit to $100 million or 100 million gas, and then fix all the bugs that come up as part of that. The clients have thoughts on how we should best approach this. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, I think Julia has written an EIP on how to do it in kind of manageable fashion. I don't. Let me try to find this.
So Julio's EIP was like, how does the gas limit actually upgrade on chain, which I think is different from saying independent of the mechanism, we just want to reach this number and fix all the bugs. Like Julio's EIP didn't make a recommendation about like what it should be. It was more like we can go from X to Y, and like here's like a mechanism to do that gradually. This feels different than saying we want to reach 100 million gas and that's like our priority. And there's like, the mechanism by which it gets activated doesn't need to change necessarily. But saying like, okay, get feels, like get feels like get is spending time on this OOM issue, and then Nethermind has some other issues and they're spending time on it.
Yes. So I like, to be honest, I think that we should do it post Fusaka, but probably it's too early to discuss post Fusaka. But I would do it in the first fork after Fusaka.
So you're saying you would not want to raise the gas limit before Fusaka?
That's my personal view. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I guess, yeah. Dankar, do you want to give your perspective on this?
Right. I mean, I think, yeah, we should really try to. I mean, I think we should just see this as independent of the hard fork schedule. But still, like, I think it's just relatively urgent, and it's not not good if this always falls behind, and like what we are working on is only the things that are in EAPs, and then we ignore this part. So I think, like, yeah, on a relatively short timeline, getting all the hurdles out of the way that technically limit us to below 100 million seems very high value. Also in terms of our signaling to the community that we are actually taking this seriously, and this is not just like everything slides back after there was a big, I don't know, public discussion about this, and people felt like we're finally moving and scaling the L1 as well.
Yeah. And yeah, Ansgar had a comment in the chat saying, like, we probably don't need to make a final decision about this today. I would agree, but I also want to avoid the case where we don't think about this and we just add a bunch of EIPs and then we say, we don't have any bandwidth to think about the gas limit. Yeah, Ansgar?
Yeah, then maybe just as a quick meta comment, like I do think in general that going forward on the EL side, we should, given that we just in the past specifically made the choice not to scale the EL, right? Like the EL is basically, other than this 20% bump of this year, is still at the same state that it was at the merge, and at the merge we basically stayed at the same level that we were pre-merge, without, except for this small kind of block time shortening. I think kind of now we're starting to align on this decision of changing that. And so if we change that, that just means that we need to be aware that from this point onwards, a significant portion of overall EL bandwidth, development bandwidth will be consumed by performance increases. And so that just means that the overall shipping bandwidth of new features is going down. So I think basically for any new hard fork, we should just basically have on the EL side lighter than we basically think we can do, because the other focus should always be implied increase in performance.
Yeah. Ben?
In light of that direction, I'd like to propose for inclusion the transaction gas cap limit, so that we don't, if the gas limit block increases to say 60 million, we don't want a single transaction that uses the entire block. It's bad for parallelization, further optimizations, and we also don't know that there are unknowns in, there might be something that's n squared that suddenly becomes, a problem when transactions get that big.
One question I would have, and it'd be good to hear what other clients seem to think, but like, why should it be 30 and not 10 or 15 or?
Lower would be better, but I think the idea was we haven't done any analysis, and you can currently do that. So
okay, that was 30 is our worst case today, and we live with this. Yes.
Well, it's 36, but
yeah, fair, yeah.
But lower would be better.
Andrew?
Yeah, also 30 million is the limit for Cisco transactions.
Okay. Yeah, like client, you have a comment about the count abstraction?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should see how 7702 plays out on mainnet before we make any kind of decision on limiting the amount of gas per transaction, because there's a very real possibility that the number of transactions per block goes down significantly after Pectra, and most people are being bundled in a single transaction that is more than 30 million gas.
But what's the downside to bundling this into 4 transactions of 7.5 million each?
Well, you pay more gas for storage reads, since you can take advantage of the warming.
Yeah, but for example, if we want to parallelize, then we need to cap the size of the transaction, because you can never parallelize one 30 million transaction, but you can parallelize several smaller ones. So I think like it is just essential to do this, and people will have to pack them into smaller transactions.
Also, it means if it's a 30 million, if it's an entire block transaction, that would imply that it's a single bundler that is dominating, pushing out everybody else.
That's not true. That's the entire design of 4337 is to have a way to get to the transactions of the person who's building the block so they can bundle all of them.
And I guess, do you think that's a concern even with a 30 million gas in it? Like if and we can make it 36, whatever, but like, if we ship 7702 tomorrow, there is already an implicit cap of 36 million for a single transaction. So should we also have like the cap in protocol on the transaction size so that if we increase the gas limit, we're kind of not implicitly increasing the transaction size limit at the same time?
I mean, I think we should just see what we can do with transaction parallelization first before we start putting strict requirements to the protocol for the size of gas limits. Like it seems like we're preemptively talking about this.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, to Ansgar's point in the chat, we're trying to decide if we want to CFI this. So like, I don't know how it seems like Besu.
I'm strongly in favor of CFIing this and of doing this because I think it's just it also becomes a thing of fairness at some point if these bundler transactions can price out anyone because they can build the full block of transactions. I also don't think it's super fair. So I would rather have them send 2 or 3 transactions, and then the likelihood that someone can get their transactions in is increasing.
Yeah, Lucas?
One last thing, this cap is relatively easily to increase or lift in the future, right? So cap to something that we have now and just to be safe, and then we can iterate on it.
Okay, then yeah, I think we should at least CFI it, and we can decide if and how we want to implement it at a later date. But it seems like there's some support for it, and then if to the extent we actually want to raise the gas limit, it can be helpful. Yeah, so I would CFI this one. Carl, yeah, you have a comment about 7212.
Yeah, so Trail of Bits recently found that the spec for 7212, that's the R1 precompile, had a bug in it. And so we will need a new RIP/EIP if you want to ship this, which is basically the same thing to put in the same address, but with this patch, it's very minor, but should be done. So just in terms of it being in terms of being
can't we
CFI'd.
just update? Yeah, why can't we just update the spec? Because the spec specifies the address, and we need to change the address to fix this bug, or?
No, use the same address, but the problem is that this has already been hit on one of the L2s, and so we need to.
Okay.
Like in terms of activating things or whatever, we need a new number to redeploy the same address for their sake. Yeah,
that seems. Yeah, I mean, I think, we should treat this as though it was like just fixing a bug in the spec. So I don't think we should.
Yeah, it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything from the L1/EIP standpoint. It just means that there'll be a new number for it, but just to expect that, and
yeah, and I think if you can just open a PR once we have the new number, like on the meta EIP and just explain this, that seems reasonable to just swap.
Absolutely, I'll do that. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I guess aside from the transaction limit cap, are there other EIPs some clients felt strongly about CFIing today that we should add to this list? And I posted the full list of what's been proposed in the chat. Okay, and yeah, and Ansgar, I see you have a comment, but let's do client teams first, and then I know that there's also 2 EIP champions here, so we can do Ansgar and then the 2 EIP champions after. But yeah, like clients increasing the code size. Which one is this? Or the contract set?
7903. Sorry, 7907.
7907.
We are kind of against 7903 because it removes the entire limit, and we are for 7907, which increases the code size limit, but also adds additional cost, and it's not unbounded.
Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, I'm the author of both of these EIPs. I think that, well, I was given the feedback that it could have a limit a little bit later. I think it would be okay to add it as like 1x or 2x the limit in the runtime code size limit. I don't really see a need for it because the init code limit is already, basically the init code doesn't incur a read from state, and it's already paid for by memory expansion. But if people are more comfortable with the limit, I'm happy to add that in.
The problem is that you can just create really, really big contracts, a really, really big init code, and then execute certain attacks because of that. So that's why the
what are
limit
the
was
attacks?
jump test analysis.
It's already metered. So it's like paid basically per word.
Yeah, but still.
I ran benchmarks, and the cost to do jump test analysis is like very much linear in the size of the code. So I think that a linear cost makes sense.
Did you publish those benchmarks? Because I remember, so that was back in the day. There was Greg Colvin. We haven't seen him in a while. He was actually having an opinion about this, the possibility to DDoS this stuff. Maybe I'm misremembering, but it would be very important to figure out if that is true.
Yes, the benchmarks are published, and there's a link to them in the ETH Magicians discussion thread.
And I guess, yeah, so Charles, if assuming the client teams prefer 7907 and you're an author on this one, were you happy with 7907? Like, you have like a preference for 7903, but are you also happy with 7907?
I think they both need to go in because without an init code size increase, you can't practically deploy larger contracts.
I see. Any other client teams have opinions on this one? Or?
I'm not another client team, but I do have an opinion. When we did the redesign of the tree, whatever it's gonna be, vertical, binary, blah blah blah. We are trying to store everything in a single leaf, in a single 32-byte word, and we only have so far 2 bytes reserved for the code size.
Didn't we up to 3 in a design session a few months ago? I brought this issue up.
Coming in?
A few months ago, I came on the call, and didn't you expand it to 3 so we could get 24 megs instead of just 64K?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. We could expand it to 3 bytes. We have some reserve space. I just want, I mean, but there's still a limit, right? even if it's even if you make it 24 megabytes, it's still going to be limited. So I would prefer not doing this, not having an unlimited code size, simply because I mean, I don't care if it's 20 megabytes or what. I just need something that's gonna fit in a reasonable amount of bytes, so that yeah, so that I don't have to redesign the entire gas cost for EIP 4762.
I see. Go ahead, you know.
So if this is combined with the transaction size increase, then there will be a fixed upper limit to how big a contract could be because we have to pay 200 gas per byte, and that comes out right now to about 140 some odd kilobytes. So there will be a functional limit, if not an explicit spec-driven limit. So as long as we keep a transaction size limit, and we make the init code a function of that transaction size limit, we'll still have limits. It's going to be the gas size and the size of the transaction driving those limits rather than an artificial, let's keep contracts to a small limit.
Yeah, init code never actually I mean, it's correlated with the runtime code because typically the way init code works is you just like copy a bunch of bytes to memory and then return it. But it's not actually physically stored in the state. So like Daniel was saying, like the limit on the runtime code is like what you really need.
So I think no one is against raising the code size limit, as far as I can hear. But
we still want a bound. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not clear on the bounds yet.
Yeah.
So
so 7907 proposes an increase to the bound, right?
7907 is an increase to the runtime code size limit, and it has a bound.
But not the init code, sorry.
Right, and 7903 uncaps init code.
Yeah, but I guess, yeah, the question is, would people be okay with a larger but capped init code size?
That's probably my preference.
Do any other client teams have opinions on this? Okay, so then I guess, would that mean CFIing 7907 and then either modifying 7903 to have a proposed limit or just adding a init code limit to the 7907 EIP? I don't know if people have a preference for that.
I would do it exactly this way. Do 7907 into CFI, and then we change 7907 to have the same init code limit as we have right now, which is twice the size of the max contract limit, which I think is reasonable.
Does anyone have concerns or objections about this?
Not necessarily concern or objection, but I want to make sure people know that there's going to be an extra charge per word over 24K. Sounds reasonable to me, but I just want to make sure people are aware of that.
Okay. Ben?
Weren't we concerned about this about 2 years ago? I think it came up to increase contract size.
Yeah, that's when back in the day it was unlimited, and that's why we added the 24K limit, and now we are increasing the 24K limit to something bigger.
Okay.
So historically, we've just had the expectation we would charge the contract size as this constant loading from disk cost, even though the size can differ. And so the limit had to be something that was commensurate with the amount that we were paying. But the EIP changes it to be a dynamic cost. The problem with that has historically been that we don't have the size of the code quickly accessible in the state anywhere. So you would still have to load the code and determine the size, which defeats the purpose. Of course, you could have an additional index in your state database to look up the code, which is what's proposed by this EIP. In the past, we've been against doing this because if you want to create some state witness mechanism, then you would still have to provide the entire code because you can't authenticate an off consensus index. But because we know now that we're going to need to chunk the code and do things in a smarter way with contract size, I generally think it's okay to have this index and rely on it for the consensus operation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone. So, okay, we'll CFI 7907 and then add this extra init code limit. Any other EIPs client teams feel strongly should be CFI'd? So we have 7825, 7907. Okay, if not, then Hadrian has been waiting for a couple calls to present an EIP. You want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Please, can someone else want to go ahead first, and I can find somewhere where I can speak freely because I cannot right now, but I will be in 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, then in that case, Anders had one, and I think Ansgar had another related proposal. So let's do those, and then we'll do Hadrian. Is Anders on the call? I thought I saw him in the chat. Is Anders?
Oh yeah, hello.
Yeah. Hey. Okay. Yeah. Hey.
Okay. So I just give a rationale for the IP. Yeah. So essentially, the price of blob space is determined by the price of the blobs, controlled by the blaze fee.
And this is EIP. What's the number? Sorry, 7918, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So the price is determined by the price of the blob base of the blobs, controlled by the blob base fee, and the price of the blob carrying transaction. So a simple demand function then is a quantity of blobs demanded as a function of the blob base fee and the cost of the execution gas. The current fee market does not operate on this demand function; it only accounts for the blob base fee, and because of this, the fee update range becomes insignificant when the TS cost dominates. So the fee market then stops operating correctly and fails to converge on an equilibrium. So you end up in this situation where the base fee may increase by 10% per slot. The cost of blob space is increased by 0.0001% per slot, trying to attain equilibrium, which of course is not happening because the TS cost dominates. And so this IP resolves this by stopping the blob base fee from falling further when it no longer has a dominant role in influencing demand. And this is achieved by adding an if statement to the calc_excess blob gas function. So if the TS cost dominates, do not subtract target blob gas and instead increase excess blob gas moderately, depending on gas usage, and otherwise proceed as normal. So I was thinking that considering Fusaka will scale blob space a lot, this is a simple change that can be done at the EL to ensure a functional fee market.
Thank you. Any thoughts, comments on this? I know, Ansgar, you had another proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I can give just for context, right? So basically, the observation has been for a while that the blob fee market is a little bit inefficient in that the price, whenever there's not enough demand, hovers around or at one way, and then it just takes a very long time to ramp up. And there was this very simple EIP to address this by originally Max Resnick, and then Davide and I kind of took that over. Now that Max is busy with other things and other ecosystems, and that would just set a kind of constant floor that's still very, very cheap, but just closer to the reasonable range, so that it doesn't always take so long to ramp up. Anders' kind of proposal now, that he just proposed. That came out of very recent work by him. That's a bit more nuanced. Basically, the idea is to say, well, every layer 2 that wants to use blobs has to send a normal transaction anyway, blob transaction, and so it already pays normal gas price, and so most of the time that completely dominates the price of the blobs. And so why don't we just use that as like the floor of the blob fee as well? I think that personally is very reasonable. The only downside I see is that it's, well, two downsides there. I see one is that it's a bit more complex, at least conceptually, and also I think not necessarily has had that much review yet of that mechanism, although it feels like that should be a reasonable approach. Yeah, and basically the other one is just that that's been like a very recent proposal. So I personally would be fine with either of those two. And there's this more principled solution, or maybe this original Mike's Resnick proposal that's a bit simpler. I think given that with PIRDAS we will have so many more blobs, probably we will have quite a few of these moments where otherwise the fee will basically be in kind of unfortunately unresponsive areas. So I would hope to at least chip one of the two. They're both specs-wise super simple. Maybe the best, given that we want to freeze PFI like CFI today, what we could do is we could move both of the two to CFI and wait for a recommendation of which of the two to use over the next 2 weeks or something. Yeah, otherwise I'd personally be happy for us to go with either.
Thank you. Yeah, anyone have thoughts or comments on this? Yeah, Ben?
I do like the newer proposal over the prior one, because I think the prior one makes sense because one way is like a crazy price. So you never launch a token at one way because Uniswap wouldn't be able to do the maths. But the newer proposal is less arbitrary. It's actually responding to the fee markets, so it feels better. It's got good vibes.
I guess, yeah, one thing I would hope is that people, like before we make this decision, we've actually like reviewed it fairly thoroughly. Both of these seem like relatively minor spec changes, like only a few lines. If we feel like we need more time to think about it, yeah, I would probably CFI either both or like one of them, but like definitely reserve the right to change whatever the curve is, or the formula is, to make sure it's correct, assuming that like the amount of work or the like complexity of implementation doesn't significantly change.
Yeah, so I can mention one thing there, that is that it depends on how the Fusaka are going to implement, if they're going to have a cap on the number of blobs you can send in a transaction, or if there's not going to be a cap. And depending on if there's a cap or not, you can have two different settings for this. So that's something we would adapt with whatever the final option is.
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone feel like we should not CFI 7918? It seems like there's relatively broad support for that. I'm not sure about 7762, but yeah, 7918 seems broadly supported. And again, we'll have to like review the curve and potentially tweak it, but broadly going in that direction. Okay, so that's CFI 7918. Does anyone want to push for 7762 being CFI'd as well? And yeah, worst case at the last minute we could swap them out if we realized that it was a much better design.
Yes, I prefer CFI 7762. I mean, I wasn't really aware of 7918,
okay.
But I don't like the argument, oh no, we need to do something super neutral, blah blah or something. We should just do the right thing. And to me, at least, 7762 feels more like the right thing than something else. I mean, I'll have a deeper look at that, but I think min base fee is what we really want, what is the natural economic thing to do. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess there's no world where we ship the two of these. Like they're mutually exclusive. So I think it's effectively free to CFI both. If we think there's a chance we might do 7762, we should just CFI it as well, and then we'll choose one of the two that we actually implement. But yeah, anyone disagree with that?
One thing I'd like to understand if the base fee falls, say, a lot, the execution base fee falls a lot, because that's what I don't understand, why we would like to have a higher floor on the blob base fee than the execution base fee. If for example, if for some reason the execution base fee falls a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair argument to simply say we want a floor on both. I would also be pro having a higher execution base fee.
One comment from the chat is like, yeah, this assumes both of these are relatively trivial to implement. Anyone have concerns about that? Like, it seems to me like they're both fairly small changes and relatively equal in size, but yeah. Does anyone feel like that's not the case? Okay. Okay, if not, then like, yeah, let's CFI both of them. And yes, we should have a deeper discussions about each of them. I don't know if we want to have a breakout call or if is there a channel in the R&D Discord actually where we can move this conversation to? Do we have like a fee market channel or something? We do not. Okay, so after this call, I'll figure out somewhere where we can continue this discussion forward, but I think for now, CFIing the two of them makes sense. Hadrian, let's do Hadrian and then Barnabas will get to your question. Hadrian, yeah, do you want to present your EIP?
Yeah, so thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to speak about EIP 7819. Unlike the other one that was discussed, it's not about fixing incentives or improving the blockchain behavior, but more about like, oh yeah, let me move somewhere else.
Hey, Adrian.
Yeah.
You're in a very echoey room, so maybe if you could get closer to your mic or go to a room with less echo and people will hear you better.
Okay, I'm outside right now. Is that better?
Yes, very much.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm at the maternity. My baby was just born this morning.
Congrats.
Okay, so as I was saying, maybe you haven't heard me. EIP 7829 is really about the developer experience and improving how contracts are built. It's not about fixing incentive like blobs or things like that. So I don't think there is any big urgency in shipping that. So the idea of this EIP is that 7702 creates this new object, the delegation for EOA, which I believe is extremely powerful. And the idea of this EIP is to have smart contracts benefit from it. And the idea is that I would like smart contracts to be able to create these objects that have, in my opinion, excellent properties. These properties are that they're very small. They are just the size of a 7702 delegation. They redirect call very efficiently, like a proxy would do, but they can be upgradable by just changing the code like 7702 allows for EOAs without having to rely on like the target implementation being in storage and required an S load to be updated. Another benefit from having this implemented is that explorers like Etherscan and so on wouldn't have to handle the many versions of the bytecode that exist for both proxy and clones. And it would just look like 7702 delegation that are clearly to understand and to analyze. So the reason I'm proposing it right now is that I believe that this feature is really great for the long-term development of smart contracts, in particular, like using the clone pattern that is way more efficient in terms of storage for the blockchain and make that more widely available. And with the change to EOF, it's unclear to me what's the right moment to propose something like that. Basically, my fear would be that with a max EOF shipping soon, we would be in a situation where new features like this one would take a very, very long time to get into like a version 2 or EOF or something like that. So I'd like people to consider it and to give feedback about this proposal. But I understand that for Fusaka, it may not be the right schedule.
Thank you. Anyone have comments or thoughts about this?
I don't really understand the PR, the EIP. I kind of get the gist of it, but I don't think it should be done in Fusaka. To be honest, it's the way I see it. It's kind of a nice change, but I don't think this is like we have already so much included today again that I think we should do this in the fork afterwards.
Anyone else have thoughts? Okay, so won't be moving this to CFI today, I believe. Thank you, Adrian, and hopefully you can get back to the maternity ward. Yeah. Yeah, and like, yes, we can add this to EOF in a different fork. Okay, so Barnabas had a comment about the deadline for SFIing things for Fusaka. I think, yes, the way I would approach it is what we want as a bar for SFI is what we're willing to include in the next DevNet. We probably shouldn't be including things until what we have on the DevNet or what we have already SFI'd is stable. In this case, it means we have PeerDAS and EOF. We should be focusing on those, getting a DevNet that runs both of them. And then once we have that, then I think we should make a call about, okay, how far do we think we are from the fork and what can we realistically include there without causing much delays? I think a lot of the things we've CFI'd are relatively simple changes. And so, potentially we want to add a couple of them to say like DevNet 1 of Fusaka that has EOF PeerDAS running smoothly. And then we add a few things. But that would kind of be the approach I would take to do this rather than like a specific deadline. If our goal is to ship PeerDAS as soon as possible, then we should have our engineering focused on that. If the first thing we've prioritized alongside with PeerDAS is EOF, then we should make sure that that works, that this is well tested. And when that's the case and we feel like there's some extra bandwidth, we make a call about what we bring in. I don't know if we want to like set some sort of more stringent date. My fear is if we do this, then we just end up breaking it, or it ends up being kind of a useless state. And that the thing that kind of bottlenecks us as we're working on the fork is like implementation stability on the DevNet. So yeah, that would be my approach. I don't know if anyone has opinions or thoughts on this. Okay. And so as of now, the stuff we have SFI in Fusaka, is PeerDAS and this list of EOF EIPs from DevNet 0 and DevNet 1 for EOF. That should be teams' priorities. Then for the CFI section, we have this RIP 7212, which we'll have to change due to this bug that Carl mentioned. We have another set of EOF EIPs, the mod XP gas increase, the transaction cap limit, so 7825, 7907, the other limits around the metering of the contract code size and then increasing the contract code limit, and we'll have to do the init code addition. We have these two EIPs with regards to the blob fee market, 7918 and 7762, that we both want to consider. And then the other thing that we kind of mentioned but don't quite have an EIP for is this idea around the gas limit. And we sort of landed on maybe we should have just an informational EIP about this that we can also include. So I do think we should draft this, and even though our sort of formal deadline was today, like that feels like an important conversation to have. So on the EL side, I guess, do people feel like there's anything important or critical that's missing from this list?
One thing that's come up, but there isn't an EIP for it, is do we want to limit the number of blobs per transaction? So the blob per block, obviously that's decided, but do we want a single transaction to be able to use all the blocks? Like if we're up to 52 blobs, do we want a 7 megabyte transaction?
Marius says yes.
And then question is, do we want it in Fusaka?
So
if we're planning to increase the blobs again in Fusaka, I think we should have this.
So do we need an EIP for this?
Why not just do this in the PureDOS EIP?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've been debating. So we will probably do this in the PureDOS EIP.
Yeah, I mean, if we need another EIP, we can just have it. But I think if it's just a part of PureDOS, it makes sense to just include it in that spec.
Yeah, it just felt kind of a bit off to decide this within the PureDOS group and not inform everyone else about it. So I guess everyone else is informed about it now. So
does anyone don't think we should have a limit? And yeah, I agree with
in the protocol. Because we've discussed this before, if I'm following, maybe I misunderstood, but just capping the number of blobs per blob transaction. We've gone back and forth on this, so like it could just be like a mempool restriction, for example.
Yeah, but then I could build a block offline, put a load of ETH in it, and throw. Yeah, I don't know if it makes any difference.
Yeah, I mean, if most people want it, I'm not going to block it.
I think the reason it makes more sense is because it helps with mempool. So maybe having it only in mempool makes sense. If you modify the software and do a large transaction with a lot of blobs, then it's fine, it's on you. But the important part is that the mempool will not have to suffer with these transactions that have a lot of blobs. But if there is another reason that restricting the blobs in a single transaction makes sense, then yeah, that wouldn't be valid anymore.
Great. Yeah, Barnabas, Ansgar, Anders, are your comments about this specifically?
Yeah. So my comment would be that I would propose not to pump the blob limit in Fusaka and do it in the blob only update. That way we can test one less thing basically, and it's going to be a bit quicker for us to ship it, and then we can focus on blob updates.
On that point, yeah, sorry, so I missed this, but in the CL call last week, we had CFI the BPO fork EIP. It was just a draft PR, and so I missed it. Did get merged. So yeah, we can still decide to activate it that way. Yeah, Ansgar, Anders, is this about the same topic?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that in general, we should always be more okay with doing things that can be later on revised. And so given that this restriction can always be lifted later on, I personally don't think we need it. I think the mempool would be the simpler place to do that. But given that there seems to be relatively broad support, I would say instead of bike shedding, we should just like have it in Fusaka and then revisit this decision like for Amsterdam or something.
Yeah, I just wanted to pitch that maybe you could have this cap also vary if you scale a lot. Then a low cap may seem very small all of a sudden. So you could adapt the cap with the target.
Okay, so I guess yeah, just to not take up the rest of the call for the implementation details here. It seems like there's broad support for a cap. We're fine doing this as part of the PureDAS EIP for now. If we were to change it in the future, then we'd probably want a different EIP, assuming this is an in-protocol cap and not a mempool one. But I think we can define the specifics of the cap on the PureDAS breakouts. Does that seem reasonable to people? Okay. So we won't add a new EIP for this, but we may expect a change with regards to capping the blob count in transactions to be added to the PureDAS EIP. And then, yeah, so to your earlier comment, Barnabas, you said we should CFI the blob parameter forks. We have done that, and yeah, my bad, I missed the draft PR. Anything else people feel strongly about CFIing today? Lynn?
Yeah, in last CL call, we talked about EIP 7917, which is deterministic proposal look ahead. And is it?
I was going to say, yeah, if for that EIP, so I should have been clearer, but I think for that EIP, I would make a call on next week's consensus layer call. And,
okay.
Yeah, so I think if we can finalize the EL EIPs today, that'd be ideal. But then I know that there's this one and there's, I think, a couple other ones we need to finalize on the CL call next week.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe just a quick comment here. Yeah, let's talk about this next week, and then homework for CL devs would just be to look at the CIP and, to the extent you can do due diligence around complexity, that would be super helpful for the conversation next week.
Okay. Charles?
Hi. I drafted a EIP to change memory pricing from quadratic to, I guess, per page, EIP 7923. I didn't get it out the door soon enough for the cutoff 2 weeks ago, but if it's, well, I'd like for it to be considered at least for Fusaka, but at least kick off the discussion about it.
So I guess, yeah, so for, you mean for Fusaka or for Amsterdam?
If not for Fusaka, then the next hard fork.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, because no one has had time to review it and we're already past the deadline, I don't think we should chat about it on the call today. If people feel like it's urgent to include it in Fusaka, we can bring it up. But then otherwise, I would default to just having this in the Amsterdam conversation. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. On a related note, I'm wondering if there is ever any time to have like a meta discussion about how EIPs get proposed, because for people who aren't close to the core dev process, it's like there's like a 2 to 4 week window at seemingly random times where we can propose things, and it's very easy to miss the window.
Yeah, I agree. And I wanted to chat about this today. I'm not sure we'll have the time, but if not, then I think on the next call we should get into this. And I think part of the reason for Fusaka specifically why this window was smaller, and it's probably fine to keep it small, is Fusaka was, effectively Pectra 2, and the overall like agreements across client teams was we want to have something that's small in scope and that ships quickly. And we kind of overloaded the first fork too much, so we had to split it into two. But I think for Glamsterdam, we definitely need to make this much clearer. And then there's a point around which conversations we want to have on the call versus like async and how to coordinate that. But yeah, I want to make sure we can at least move forward with the Fusaka scope today before getting into how we plan the next fork. Ben?
Sorry to go back to an earlier issue, and I know you accepted the PR, but the change in the PDAS proposal. But the reason for also having a max cap on blobs per transactions is because there is a cap on blobs, and it makes them harder to pack. So if you did if everybody did 48 blob transactions and it was a 52 cap, then you can only fit one of those in. Whereas if they're broken up, then you can more efficiently pack the transactions in. So you'd end up with a lower amount of blobs if we didn't have a limit.
Okay. Yeah, can we discuss this on the PRS breakout or async just so we can move forward with Fusaka here?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, last call on like client team's strong opinions for CFI. I think we've gone through most of them. If there's nothing else, then what I would like to like explicitly go over is the EL proposals that we effectively won't be doing this fork, just so that we can provide clarity to people. So of the PFI list, the EL ones that we're not going to be doing include 7666, which is EVM-ifying the identity precompile, 7668, removing the Bloom filters, 7688, the SSZ forward compatible. Oh, sorry, this one's a CL one. We can make that call next week. 7732 is CL. Then 7783 is not a core EIP, but I don't think so. I don't think we CFI'd it. So yeah, we wouldn't be doing that, at least in a coordinated way. 7791 gas to ETH opcode, not doing that. 7793 the precompile to get the index of transactions within blocks. 7805 fossil. 7819 to create delegate opcode that Hadrian presented. 7823 the upper bounds for mod exp. 7843 precompile to get the current slot number. 789 emitting logs on revert. 7898 and coupling the execution payload from the beacon block. 7903 removing the init code size limit. 7917 we'll discuss next week. 7918 we CFI'd, and then 719 we're not doing either. So I will DFI basically all the ones that are EL that are not CFI'd, and then we'll do the same thing next week for the CL side. And then yeah.
Marius brought up in chat that we thought we did both of them on EXPs, and I had thought we had done that too, because both two clients.
So we didn't. Yeah, so we didn't. So 7823 we did not CFI yet. Do we want to do that?
Yeah, basically another mind we're in favor of it, and Epsilon is also in favor of it because it solves a whole lot of problems.
Okay, and this is just adding a bound.
Yes, topping it out at 4,096 bytes, which is sufficient for any RSA signature.
Okay. Does anyone disagree with CFA? I think that's one. Okay. So then that would be the last that we CFI'd. All the other ones I mentioned that are EL specific, we would decline for this fork, and then on the CL call next week, we will go through the similar process and get us to our final list of CFI'd EIPs. Anything else on Fusaka scoping? Okay. Then yeah, we have 10 minutes left. I shared this proposal last week on the chat around reconfiguring all core devs. In short, the idea is that we are now working on different forks in parallel, and we kind of mix two concerns like implementation details of the current fork with planning of the next fork. And clearly, as we discussed, like we could do a better job of coordinating on the planning side, both in terms of figuring out what's the most important thing in the fork, why is that important, who does it affect, and you know, how important is that, and also like yeah, having more focus on the implementation of the current fork. So the proposal would be to basically split all core devs such that the existing testing calls that happen every Monday that Perry and Mario have been running would become the effectively ACDT was my name, all core devs testing, where we discuss the current fork. So effectively the Pectra portion of today's call. And then all core devs, ACDE and ACDC would be only focused on looking at the next fork. And what this means is we would have more time on these calls to discuss like at a high level what should be the most important thing to do in a fork. So for example, for Amsterdam, we first start with like, okay, what should be like this headliner for the fork? What should the fork be about? And ideally get to hear from a broader set of the community as part of this. So we could bring in, you know, representatives from, you know, app development, compiler teams and whatnot to try and figure out, okay, what is the most important thing to ship for Ethereum? And then once we agree on that, what's like the right EIP for it? And then once we agree on that, what are the other things we can include alongside, kind of like we did today? There's a lot of implementation details to figure out, but I think the first step is agreeing to doing this or not. And in practice, what this would look like, I think, is that once Pectra goes live, then this call would just focus on Amsterdam, and all of the Fusaka conversation would happen in the testing call. And the one, I guess the one caveat there is that this assumes the scope stays fixed. But I think if we are, you know, if we're working on Fusaka and we realize that we need to add an EIP, remove an EIP or whatever, it would still make sense to bring it up on this call, just a sanity check. But yeah, that given a fork, like a fixed fork scope, we would just move forward, like, yeah, with that. And so basically, like, yeah, to the CFI comment, my point would be like, anything that's SFI'd kind of moves to the testing call, but then moving stuff from CFI to SFI'd is probably still something we want to do here. Yeah. And yeah, to put this other comment, it's like, it'll be impossible to avoid. I think that's probably true. Like, I don't think it should be like a fully, you know, like if we need to ship Fusaka to ship to Amsterdam, so we shouldn't just like naively fully ignore it. If there is something that we can accelerate by spending a few minutes on the calls talking about it, that's good. But the main purpose of this call should be, you know, Amsterdam going forward. And then this means if you're working on Fusaka, the expectation is we have everyone on the testing call there to resolve the issues. And so like, if there is something that's so urgent that we can't wait a week to make a decision, we should obviously bring it up on the CL or EL call, but my expectation is like 90 to 95% or more of the things would just be handled there. But yeah, POTUS, do you want to share more?
Just something that, you said it, but I just wanted to be explicit, is that there's no going to be any decisions making outside of this call of what actually goes into the fork. Like if there's discussions about the things that were CFI'd and that are apparently ready to be included, this is a decision that is not going to be made on the testing calls.
Correct. So like, yeah, the testing call effectively works with like the set of SFI'd EIPs. And look, at some point, like, you know, there might be some weird boundaries, like for example, this blob transaction cap we discussed, and people can use their judgments on those. But say we start working on Fusaka, we're not going to add EPBS to Fusaka on the testing call. Like if we wanted to do something like that, or even add like the precompile or whatever, even if it's a minor EIP, we would still make this call here. But then once that's set and we know what we're working on, like the implementation coordination moves to the testing call. Radek?
Yeah, so just thinking that talking about future forks is something that we haven't been doing that much. So at least that's my understanding. We want to talk more about it. So it's adding more things to to ACDE, ACDC, or basically to our agenda. And so if we push both ACDE and ECDC topics about the current fork to one testing call, it may be that we won't be able to fit everything into 90 minutes. So we will see how it plays out, but I'm just worried a little bit that one testing call for everything might be not sufficient.
So the testing call is every week, and right now it's like an hour a week. Most of the time we don't use the entire hour, and we spent, I don't know, like some time on Pectra today, but not a ton. So I think we can start with that and see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay, it's every week. Sorry, yeah. If it's every week, then I think it's fine.
But we're also only not using the whole hour because there's only like 30 people attending. Probably when we make this official and there's like 80 people attending, then we might take more time.
Yeah. And look, like maybe we can play with the structure and whatnot, and maybe this call ends up being an hour because we have less to discuss, and the other call is 90 minutes or whatever. Like I think we should be flexible, but my sense is like, yeah, I would not start with more than one call a week. And one note, actually, like, yeah, we haven't been like streaming and recording the testing calls now, and we will start doing that as part of this. So yeah. Ansgar?
Yeah, and I just wanted to very briefly give a shout out to also these new research calls that Barnaby and I kind of recently launched. We had the first one just the other day where we talked a little bit about local building, and we will have a second one on May 7th. And I think those can actually nicely fill this gap of like start talking about these like somewhat further out topics, not to replace Allcodev a conversation about this. Of course, Allcodev will still kind of like talk about them once we are very close to making decisions about them, but I think it can give a bit of an advanced space for at least some of these higher level topics, so that it maybe takes a little bit of the pressure from kind of Allcodevs having to have this more vision side conversation as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this. Like my rough mental model is like the research calls should think in years, and like what are the things on the horizon for Ethereum and where should we be spending more or less of our efforts. Core devs on the CL and EL side should focus on like months, like what do we want in the next fork and why is this important? And then the testing call should focus on weeks, like how do we get the specific PR implemented? And then, yeah, to Lucas's comment on attendance, like I think teams should have people at all these calls, but it doesn't have to be the same people. Like there are people who maybe don't want to spend a year talking about what's going to go in the next fork and would rather talk about how we're implementing the thing in this fork and vice versa. So yeah, if you want to be part of every single conversation, then yes, you will attend more calls, but I think teams can also assign different people for different parts of the process. Trent, you had a comment?
Yeah, this is just about Pectra pages, so I can go at the end if people have final comments about.
Okay, yeah. So I guess, yeah, just to wrap this conversation up, it seems like everyone is in favor. I haven't heard any like major objections. So I think we should start this like next month once Pectra goes live, and we effectively move this over to like Glamsterdam planning. There'll be a bunch of minor issues to figure out, but I'll assume that if I haven't heard any objections by like the CL call next week, everyone has reviewed the proposal and is happy with it, and module figuring out some details, we're moving ahead. Yeah, okay, Trent.
Yeah, some of you may have already gotten messages about this, but just wanted to broadcast it again. In years past, we've done these sort of compilations of core contributor perspectives. We did it for the launch of the beacon chain, we did it for the merge, and we did it again last year for Denkun, and we'd like to do it again for Pectra, tentatively titled Pectra Pages. The way it works, we hope it will be a complement to the team perspectives that everybody has released on what went well with Pectra and what we could improve. So if you were materially involved in core development over the last year or so, specifically related to Pectra, please do reach out to myself or Nixo. We're working on coordinating this. The deadline is April 28th. Hopefully that's enough time for people to submit. It's not a very long, you can choose how much depth you put into your responses, but yeah, looking back on Pectra, things we could improve, specifically how the process could have been handled better, but also things like any contributions that you or your team are particularly proud of, somebody that you want to give a shout out to and recognize their contributions on your team or otherwise, and something like particularly nasty bugs. This is a way for you to surface things that are unique to your perspective that may not filter up to like the high level team summary. So again, reach out to myself or Nixo if your team lead hasn't already sent you the form, and submit it by April 28th. Thanks.
Thank you, Trent. Yeah, I think this is a great note to end on. So thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you all next week. And yeah, let's get Pectra shipped.